subscribe to the channel, and hear even more exciting stories. What I learned from my family's biggest lies. Hey Reddit. This is the kind of story I never thought I'd tell, partly because I didn't believe things like this happened outside movies or soap operas. But here I am, questioning everything I thought I knew about my own family, because it turns out they've been hiding way more than embarrassing baby photos and grandma's secret pie recipe. For background, I, 25F, grew up thinking we were the normal kind of weird. The kind of family that quoted old sitcoms at the dinner table, argued over who got the last slice of pizza, and religiously watched football on Sundays, even though none of us really cared about the game. My parents were strict about some things, curfews, family time, and not airing our dirty laundry, but also weirdly relaxed about others. I chalked most of it up to quirks. If something didn't make sense, you just laughed it off, because, that's just how our family is. Looking back, there were definitely a few odd rules and off-limits topics, like why Dad never talked about his childhood or why we weren't allowed to visit certain relatives. I remember one Thanksgiving when I asked about my Aunt Jess, and the table went so quiet you could hear the gravy bubble. My mom smiled that too bright smile and changed the subject to mashed potatoes. But I trusted them. Family was supposed to be safe, a place where, even if you didn't always get along, you at least told the truth. Or so I thought. Turns out, some secrets are so deeply buried that you don't even know you're standing on them until the ground cracks open beneath your feet. I guess I always wondered, in the back of my mind, if there was more to our quirks. But I never thought I'd find the answer in the most unexpected, ordinary way. It started with a box. Seriously, of all the ways to stumble on a family secret, you never expect it to be something as cliché as a box in the attic. But here we are. My parents were renovating the house, and Mom asked me to help sort through old junk. There was dust everywhere, and I was knee-deep in forgotten yearbooks and tangled Christmas lights when I found it. A faded shoebox tucked way behind a stack of board games we never played. Curiosity won out over allergies. The box was heavier than I expected, sealed with a brittle strip of masking tape. Inside, there were letters, hundreds of them, yellowed at the edges, tied with string. I picked one at random. The handwriting was neat, unfamiliar, and not addressed to anyone I recognized. Flipping through a few more, my heart started to race. The letters were all from the same person, someone named M. What really caught my attention, though, was the tone. These weren't friendly family updates or the usual holiday cheer. They were desperate, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading. "Why won't you let me see her?" one letter said. "She deserves to know the truth." Another, "I miss you every day. Please write back." My brain scrambled for explanations. Was this some old family friend? An ex? I didn't recognize the return address. I wanted to believe it was nothing, a forgotten pen pal, some drama from before I was born. But there was a photo at the bottom of the box, my mom, barely older than I am now, holding a baby that was definitely not me. Suddenly, 100 weird family moments started making sense, and also made absolutely no sense at all. I sat there on the attic floor, surrounded by ghosts of a past I never knew existed, heart thumping, hands shaking, already knowing that whatever I found next would change everything. I wish I could say I did something brave or clever in that moment, but honestly, I just sat there, staring at the photo and letters like they might rearrange themselves into something less earth-shattering. My thoughts spun in circles. Who was M? Who was the baby? Why did my mom never mention any of this? And why did it all feel like a punch in the gut, even before I understood the details? Shock kept me frozen. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the box. Part of me wanted to run downstairs and demand answers right then and there. Another part wanted to shove everything back under the Christmas lights and pretend I'd never seen it. I mean, what was I even supposed to say? "Hey, Mom, care to explain this baby you forgot to mention?" Instead, I put the letters back and just sat on the floor, breathing in dust and old secrets. I replayed every weird moment from my childhood, the questions that got dodged, the tense looks between my parents during family gatherings, the names I was told not to bring up. All those red flags I'd brushed off as family quirks suddenly glowed neon. For the rest of the day, I went through the motions, helping with renovations, smiling at my parents, pretending everything was normal. Inside, though, I was on fire. Anger flared up, sharp and hot, mixed with a deep, aching hurt. Why didn't they trust me with the truth? Did everyone else know but me? The not knowing was almost worse than whatever the real answer could be. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photo. My mom with that haunted look, a baby cradled in her arms, a whole chapter of our family story I'd never even known existed. I decided I couldn't keep this to myself. I needed the truth, no matter how ugly or complicated it was. The next few days, I became a detective in my own house. Every interaction felt loaded, every casual conversation a possible clue. I started small, Googling the return address on the letters, just in case it meant something obvious. It didn't. I combed through family albums, looking for faces that didn't quite fit, listening for half-remembered names at dinner. My parents seemed oblivious, joking about paint colors and weekend plans, while my mind raced with questions. I debated going straight to my mom, but I wasn't ready, not until I knew more. So I tried a different approach. My Aunt Linda, my mom's younger sister, who was always a bit of a family outlier. I texted her, saying I found some interesting old photos and wanted to ask her about them. She called me immediately, voice nervous but kind. I could hear her take a deep breath when I mentioned the letters from M. There was a long pause before she spoke. "I always wondered when you'd find out," she said quietly. My heart dropped. She explained, haltingly. That M was Mark, a man my mom dated seriously before my dad. The baby in the photo was my half-sister, Emily, born years before I was. My mom, overwhelmed and pressured by her own parents, had given Emily up for adoption as a newborn. Mark tried to stay in touch, writing letters for years, but my grandparents intercepted everything. Aunt Linda said she found the box once, but was told never to mention it. I felt a strange mix of relief, at least I wasn't adopted, and heartbreak. A sister? Why had no one ever told me? The web of silence was even bigger than I'd thought. Aunt Linda urged me to talk to my mom directly. She said Mom had always wanted to tell me, but never knew how. That night, my mind was a battlefield. Curiosity, anger, guilt, and a desperate need to know who Emily was, and why her existence was the family's deepest secret. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The not knowing was its own kind of poison, and Aunt Linda's words kept echoing in my mind. She always wanted to tell you. That night after dinner, when my parents were cleaning up and the house was unusually quiet, I finally did it. I walked into the kitchen, holding the photo in my hand. My voice was steadier than I felt. "Mom, can we talk about this?" She glanced over, saw the picture, and for a moment her face just crumpled. Dad put down the dish he was washing and turned, his jaw tense. The air felt electric, like right before a thunderstorm. My mom sat down at the table, almost in slow motion. She reached for my hand and started to cry, quiet, shaking sobs that made me realize how long she'd been carrying this. For a minute, I almost forgot my own anger. My dad stood behind her, his face unreadable, but I could tell this wasn't news to him. She told me everything. How she'd fallen in love with Mark in college. How they'd planned a future together until she found out she was pregnant. Her parents, my grandparents, panicked, pressured her to give the baby up, convinced her it was for the best. Mark fought it, wrote letter after letter, but my grandparents kept him, and eventually, the baby, out of her life. After Emily was adopted, my mom fell into a depression, eventually met my dad, and they agreed to build a new life together, one that didn't include the past. "I wanted to tell you every day," she whispered. But every year that passed, it got harder. I was ashamed. "I didn't want you to think less of me." Dad squeezed her shoulder and finally spoke. "Your mother's been through hell. This family, we thought we were protecting you." I listened, stunned, angry, and deeply sad. There were so many questions, so much grief in that kitchen. But for the first time, there were also real answers, and the beginning of an honest conversation. The days after that kitchen confession felt heavier than I expected. My mom drifted through the house like a ghost. Relieved to have finally told the truth, but fragile in a way I'd never seen. Dad tried to play peacemaker, making my favorite dinners and hovering, but the silence between us stretched thin. I was overwhelmed by a wave of conflicting emotions. Anger at my grandparents for controlling the narrative, sorrow for my mom's pain, and a gnawing guilt that I'd forced all this out in the open. Sleep was a mess. I'd lie awake at night replaying her words, picturing Emily as a baby, as a teenager, as a grown woman somewhere in the world, my sister. I kept wondering what kind of life she'd had, whether she ever wondered about us, if she was safe and happy, or if she felt abandoned. A part of me wanted to track her down immediately. Another part was terrified of what I might find. Family gatherings became tense. My dad's side seemed oblivious, but my mom flinched whenever my grandparents' names came up. Aunt Linda called to check on me, offering comfort and awkward jokes, but I could tell she was carrying her own load of regret. I felt oddly isolated, like I was seeing everyone through new, cracked glass. I started resenting the years of half-truths, the way protection had really meant silence and shame. It was a lonely sort of grief, because who do you talk to about the sibling you never met, the parents who hid so much, the grandparents who thought they knew best? I found myself snapping at little things, crying at random, drifting through work in a fog. And yet, underneath the anger and confusion, something else was growing. For the first time, I felt like I knew my mother as a whole person, not just as mom. Her pain was raw and human. Our relationship wasn't magically fixed, but it was more real, built on fragile, painful honesty instead of a picture-perfect lie. Eventually, the ache of not knowing became worse than the fear of finding out. I realized I couldn't just sit with this new knowledge and pretend life was normal. One evening, after another long, awkward dinner, I told my parents I wanted to try and find Emily. My mom's face went white, but she nodded, her voice trembling as she admitted she'd thought about searching for years but was terrified to reach out. We started with what we had, the adoption papers my mom had hidden away, some old correspondence from Mark, and the handful of letters that hadn't been intercepted. Aunt Linda helped too. Turns out, she'd kept a few of her own, just in case. We combed through every document, piecing together bits of information. The city Emily was born in, the adoption agency, her possible last name. I joined support groups online, forums for adoptees, birth families, people searching for relatives lost to closed adoptions. The kindness of strangers amazed me. They offered tips, encouragement, stories of reunion and heartbreak. Slowly, we put together a plan. Contacting the agency, registering with reunion databases, reaching out to possible matches. The search itself was a roller coaster. Weeks passed with no news, then a possible lead would appear, only to go nowhere. Some nights I'd obsessively refresh my email, half hoping, half dreading a reply from someone who might be my sister. My mom became more involved too, writing a letter to the agency, pouring out her story and her hope for forgiveness. All this searching brought my mom and me closer, in fits and starts. There were setbacks, fights, tears, moments where one of us wanted to give up. But there was also relief, like we'd stopped pretending, finally facing the shadows together. Even my dad, usually quiet, opened up more, sharing stories from their early years I'd never heard. Whether we found Emily or not, I knew something had already shifted. I was learning to set boundaries. With my grandparents, who still refused to talk about it, and with the old version of my family I'd outgrown. For the first time, the future felt open, even if it was terrifying. I didn't expect the next major family gathering to feel like walking into a minefield, but that's exactly how it was. My grandmother turned 80, and the whole extended family gathered at her house. Cousins, uncles, everyone smiling, passing dishes like we were a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Only this time, I saw all the cracks under the surface. Tension hummed between my parents and my grandparents. My mom barely made eye contact with her own mother, and there was a brittle politeness to their words. Aunt Linda and I stuck together, exchanging glances every time someone tiptoed around awkward subjects, like when the conversation veered toward family traditions or old memories. I noticed how quickly my grandparents shut down any mention of the past, especially if it was my mom who brought it up. Midway through dinner, the dam finally broke. Someone, a well-meaning cousin, bless his oblivious heart, made a joke about family secrets, and Aunt Linda laughed a little too hard. The room went quiet. I don't know what possessed me, but I asked, "Why don't we ever talk about Emily?" You could feel the air get sucked out of the room. My grandmother's fork clattered against her plate. My grandfather glared, then said sternly, "Some things are better left in the past." But my mom, shaking, spoke up for the first time in my memory. "She's not just the past, she's my daughter. and I'm done pretending she never existed. A flurry of emotions erupted, my grandmother crying, my grandfather storming out, relatives whispering in corners. The gathering never really recovered. People left early, dessert was barely touched. But for all the drama and awkwardness, something important happened. The secret wasn't secret anymore. My mother stood her ground, and I stood with her. On the drive home, the car was quiet but lighter. My mom squeezed my hand. For the first time, I felt like we were moving forward, no matter how messy it got. After that fateful family gathering, everything changed, quietly, and then all at once. The truth, now aired, couldn't be stuffed back into the attic with the dusty boxes and unsaid words. Some relatives called to offer support or apologies, while others distanced themselves, not knowing what to say. My grandparents refused to discuss the subject and barely spoke to my mom for weeks. But I noticed something shift in our own little household. Less tiptoeing, more honest conversations, a sense that we were finally living in the open. The search for Emily took on new energy. My mom, braver now, reached out to more agencies and registered for DNA databases. Aunt Linda became our unofficial family historian, digging up old records, emailing distant cousins. One afternoon, months after our confrontation, we got a message, a possible match on one of the DNA sites. We stared at the screen, afraid to hope, but when we finally connected with her, it was undeniable. Emily was real, and she wanted to know us too. The first video call was surreal. Emily looked like a blend of my mom and me, but also entirely herself. She'd grown up happy, with loving parents, but always sensed something was missing. The first meeting in person was emotional chaos, laughter, tears, long silences, and a strange sense of déjà vu. We talked for hours, trading stories and photos, slowly patching together what had been lost. It wasn't perfect, and some things would always be awkward, but it felt like a new beginning. As for my grandparents, reconciliation was slow. My mom set boundaries, refusing to pretend anymore. Some relationships healed, others stayed strained, but I learned that closure doesn't mean everything is fixed. It just means the truth is finally out, and everyone gets to choose what comes next. For me, it was bittersweet but empowering. The lies no longer held power over us. Our family looked different, but for the first time, it felt true. Looking back, I never imagined a dusty old box in the attic would unravel my entire understanding of family. I used to believe that secrets protected us, that silence kept things running smoothly. Now, I see how lies, no matter how well-intended, just built walls between us, making us strangers in our own home. The truth wasn't painless. There were arguments, tears, and some relationships that will probably never be the same. But there was also healing I never expected. My mom's relief at being able to speak openly, my own sense of connection with a sister I never knew I had, even the small kindnesses from relatives who chose honesty over comfort. Our family might never be picture perfect, but for the first time, I know who we really are, and that's enough. If you're reading this and living with a family secret, here's my advice. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't let guilt or shame keep you from asking hard questions. You deserve the truth, even if it hurts at first. The people who truly love you will stay, even when things get messy. And if you're the one holding the secret, remember, honesty is a gift, not just for others, but for yourself. Forgiveness takes time. So does rebuilding trust. Some days, you'll want to run back to ignorance, but I promise, life is better in the light. You get to choose what kind of family you want to build moving forward, with real love and honesty at the center. I'm grateful for the chaos and the clarity, for the chance to write a new chapter, not just for myself, but for all of us. Secrets lose their power the second you bring them into the open. Thanks for reading, Reddit. If you're walking a similar path, you're not alone. Sometimes the truth really does set you free.